Okay, and finally we will talk about weather balloons and meteorological stations. So these are time-honored old school ways of observing weather and climate, and while they don't have the coverage of modern instrumentation like satellites, they still have very valuable uses. So let's start with the weather balloon. These are typically made of some highly expandable material so that as they rise up and ambient pressure decreases, they can expand further and further. And so they can rise up to 40 kilometers in altitude or so, and as a result allow us to get high resolution temperature and wind and other atmospheric data from the troposphere all the way to the higher stratosphere. They date back to the late 1800s, and there's about 800 locations worldwide where weather balloons are released routinely to measure atmospheric conditions. Now, meteorological stations or weather stations typically consist of an array of observing tools, and so typical quantities that are measured are wind speed and direction using an anemometer, a sensor to measure air humidity and temperature. So obviously the latter is a thermometer. Humidity is measured with a hygrometer. Often there is a device to measure solar radiation, which is called a pyranometer. And there's also typically a rain gauge to measure liquid precipitation, and a barometer that measures atmospheric pressure. And these are the standard instruments you would expect on most weather stations. Now, almost all of these things can be measured with high precision using satellites these days. The main advantage is that you can get a resolution and an accuracy for a very specific point. If you're interested in a very specific location, like for agricultural uses in particular, it is very helpful to have a weather station because that will tell you exactly what is going on, exactly where you want to know it. The uncertainty in satellites is still a little higher when you're talking about exact locations on the surface. And with this final section on the old school ways of measuring weather using weather stations and weather balloons, I will leave it for this course, and I hope you've learned something about climate physics and that it was of interest. And goodbye.